There are people all over the world now that are having contact with reptilian entities, whether it's through abduction experiences on a craft or they're trafficking to deep underground military bases or even deep underground cities. And of course, we have to mention Antarctica because big time there's reptilians working in Antarctica. I'm now talking on levels, dimensions, different planes of existence. And you have to accept all of this as reality before you can really understand the size and scope of the agenda the reptilians have against humanity.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, that if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Dude, thanks for coming back. And you were dropping bombs left and right on the last episode, so Luke and I were like, we got to get him just focused on like reptilians or mermaids or whatever he wants to hone in on, because we couldn't figure out which rabbit trail to take because we loved it. There was so much good stuff there. So
are we starting?
But yeah,
now?
So just to give you a heads up, we just had an episode that dropped yesterday with a lady, our first abduction person who's been abducted her whole life came on the show, and she told her story first to us on a podcast. It was her first podcast she ever talked about. She was abducted since she was 3, and you were in my mind so much during that interview, our conversation that we had. And I think you even talked about, I brought you up at one point in that interview, our conversation, just giving people permission to, hey, this happened to you a lot, and you went through some trauma. And so it was really good. It was really good to have done our podcast with you. It kind of helped prep us for actually some of these people coming on our show, coming out of the woodworks and saying, hey, this has been happening my whole life. I trust you guys. I would like to talk about my story on your podcast. So thank you. Thank you for our interview with you. That really helped us do that interview. And this stuff gets heavy, man. It's just getting heavier on our show. So I can only imagine what you deal with on a daily basis.
Or not imagine, yeah.
It's just weird, man. It just gets weirder, and you got to have like the stomach for it, I guess, in some ways, right?
Yeah, you do need a stomach for it. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like no matter how many questions you ask, the answer is always it's more complicated than that, and you keep going down the rabbit hole. It's just So yeah, I mean, I just recently wrote a new prayer resource. You know, I have 3 books of prayers now, and guess what? It's still not enough. So we're still engineering new ways to get people set free and delivered. And like, I just landed on a new one, which is probably the Rolls Royce of my prayer resources. I've seen more breakthrough on this than any other single resource ever, like times 2. And the angle on this particular resource is we're separating people from the iniquity of the root races behind the 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati. And I have the list of names of the races that led to the bloodlines that are the Illuminati. I may be the first person in all of history to have fished this thing out, but man, it's...
Are you leaving us on a cliffhanger?
No, we don't have to talk about. I don't think you're.
Do we need to read the book, or we should be coming this summer from Dan Duval?
Well, we've heard about it. Well, she was talking about she's traced her bloodline to Rh negative or something, and her father, her adopted stepfather. I think her stepfather was like a secret Mason, always gone. And then it started happening a lot to her. So a lot of bloodline talk. And we get a lot of emails from people asking specifically about blood types, yada, yada. And we don't really know. I'm like, you have to be like an ancient historian, a genetics professor, all these things when you do a show like this. Like, who knew you had to have all these skills and talents to try to give people better answers? But,
well, we can bring that up, and I'll give some answers.
Okay.
I mean, truly, we could talk about blood. We can talk about, the thing about abductions, one of the patterns that you see is that you're going to see a lot of Masonic backgrounds. You're going to see a lot of SRA exposure, whether it's suppressed or remembered, it's there. And then the alien abductions, it's like you see those three often. It's a pattern.
The unholy trinity there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, we deal with a lot of the alien abduction stuff, but usually it sits on a foundation of SRA. But a lot of the alien abductees don't want to talk about the SRA. They want to focus on the alien abduction stuff.
And you're just trying to get it to stop. So you have to kind of go to the source of why it's happening.
Yeah. I mean, that's, goodness. I mean, I've worked with a lot of people that have pretty off the chart stuff going on. And what I've found, we may be getting through all these memories and it'll be like one side or the other. Sometimes we do a lot of the SRA stuff and they don't want to look at the alien stuff because some of the alien stuff may be like the most horrific. And then there's the flip side where you have people that want to only look at the alien stuff and they don't want to even consider the SRA. It's so interesting because even like I interviewed Tony Rodriguez on my podcast and he wrote his book, Series Colony Cavalier, great guy. He's not even really a believer, but he does acknowledge Jesus. It's interesting, his position. But his whole thing is a 20 and back. And he went to Ceres Colony, Mars, Moon, and met all these alien creatures along the way because they're on all the different bases and stuff. But when I was interviewing him, I took him deep into the SRA stuff because he was prepared with SRA before any of that stuff started really happening, the off-planet travel and everything else. And so,
Dan, is that how it often happens? That those two things are married to each other? Like it's like foundationally it's satanic ritual abuse, and then it escalates to that, or is that a gateway for that, or is that a complicated? Yeah.
It's variable, but they're often woven together one way or another. Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. It's darkness and darkness. I mean, it kind of, anyway, yeah.
So with reptilian stuff, we can definitely just jump right into that. And
let's do that.
have a lot to say about reptilians.
Awesome.
And I even have a map, and I'll share it and I'll just present it as, you could take it or leave it, but this is the data that was given to me by working with someone who worked with the reptilians. And it's on how they replicate, take over a human host, and become the governing consciousness in the body. So the shape-shifting reptilian stuff. And I also have a lot on Dracos. And so I'll just say whatever, but I'll be sure to say everyone, this isn't canon law or anything. This is what they told me.
Right.
Yeah. No, and we haven't done anything on it. So just to give for our listeners. So the Dracos is actually like a race of reptilians. And then the shape-shifting is something that's like a takeover, like you were saying.
I look at it as two different groups because everybody that I've spoken to always says the same thing. The Dracos don't shapeshift. They are always in their reptilian form. They actually hate humans and they think we are disgusting.
Some of us are.
Well, that's fine with us because we talk about how Bigfoot is just always this big, stinky, 7 foot, 8 foot tall ape creature, right? And some people say, it's just shape-shifting. I'm like, no, he's not wearing a costume. That's how he shows up. Why wouldn't there be reptilians, Luke?
I mean,
we got Bigfoot out there. Why wouldn't we have lizard people?
And we've been memeing Hillary Clinton as a reptile for years. So,
well, Dick Cheney is a reptile, as is George W. Bush.
Let's go.
That's a good start.
You just dropped the bomb on her. Is he joking or is he serious, Luke? I don't know.
No, that was a very serious statement.
Yeah,
I love it.
Serious.
I mean, yeah.
So start us from the beginning, because break this down for us.
Here's the thing about the reptilians. There are people all over the world now that are having contact with reptilian entities, whether it's through abduction experiences on a craft or their trafficking to deep underground military bases or even deep underground cities. And of course, we have to mention Antarctica because big time there's reptilians working in Antarctica with they helped the Nazis build the Nazi base in Antarctica. Like they were very much involved. And so anyone that I've
damn, that sounds like a whole episode right there.
There you go again. there you go.
What's happening in Antarctica? You know, like
this is like that was like 5 different podcasts right there.
Like we're ready, dude. We're ready for all of it.
Y'all didn't even know that. I didn't even know that we had started the podcast. Okay, I know, right? I'm confused.
We snuck it out.
That's how good we are.
We snuck up on you. Yeah, we were like, let's just get him going.
We're either really good or really bad.
So let me talk a little bit about some of my run-ins with this whole subject. Okay, so first of all,
break it down.
I am not approaching this subject as an experiencer. In other words, I don't have like one of those stories where I can tell you guys, hey, I was walking down the street and a big reptile just came out of someone's shirt, jumped on me, 7 feet tall, and I saw his teeth, smelled his breath, and that's my story. Like I don't have it. But because I do deprogramming with people that have come out of SRA, have come out of government projects, have come out of the Illuminati, I am constantly dealing with repressed memories that are held by soul fragments that have shattered to handle the stress, the trauma that the person is going through. And it goes so much deeper because, let's say we talk about DID, right? People understand, okay, well, what is dissociative identity disorder? It's the presence of 2 or more distinct personality states within a single human body. And, we can say, okay, well, that exists because of mind control and trauma and near-death experiences and all this stuff. But most of the people that are being targeted for mind control projects and different things are being targeted because of their bloodlines. Why? Because their bloodlines have iniquity. We talked about iniquity the last time I was on.
Yeah.
And so what is iniquity? It's perversion. That means you're deviating that person from the original humanity. And so, sin can accomplish that, but so can the intervention or insertion of foreign genetic substance and markers and code and all of that stuff. And so a lot of people that I work with, they're not fully human. And for that reason, they're having encounters with a lot of these entities. And that was my gate to running into the reptilian problem, because what I was running into was people that had reptilian genetics in their bodies, and they had like alternate personalities that were part reptilian, and they had genetic code in their physical bodies anchoring in this nature. And some of them did partially shapeshift, which I've seen what that looks like partial shapeshifts and things. I mean, I've worked with people that do that. So, I come at this from an angle of how do I get people set free from this stuff? I mean, it's really bad. And in the early days of working with people, I will tell you, major eye rolls for me. Every time I would be working with someone, we're trying to get parts on the inside of them healed. We're trying to get them delivered of their demonic bondages and problems. We run into this reptilian thing. And I would be like, Holy Spirit, Jesus, is there reptilian genetics on the inside of this person? He has to come back. Yes. I just be like, oh. And the reason why is because no matter what I said or what I prayed, it didn't work. It didn't work. And I was at my wit's end because this was multiple people. And I mean, session after session, I'd be sitting down with these people trying to figure out, how do I get you delivered of your reptilian genetics? And I was just hitting walls for a long time. And eventually what happened was I figured out a lot of the mechanics of what anchors in the reptilian genetics. And when we figured out all of the legalities, and I wrote this prayer called Freedom from Reptilian Genetics, people started getting delivered and set free. It was phenomenal. Now, this was many years ago. Then I realized that It's not isolated to reptilian genetics. Like that's not people's only problem, because we found that similar legalities also got people delivered from draconians. So we could talk about dragons as well later on, as well as Venusians, which is Venus stuff, the Martian stuff, shadow people stuff, Lantean stuff. I mean, we got all these races, even vampire. I found out vampire was a bloodline. Go figure. As well as lichen. Like it's so my whole worldview had to change on that subject. But you guys want me to talk about reptilians, so I'm gonna leave that there. Maybe podcast 3. I don't know. So
let's go.
All the bloodlines.
So I was approaching this problem, just trying to get people like delivered, and we finally started to. And as we did, we got more information, and then I ended up with just like a collection of data and facts about reptilians over time that I'll just go ahead and share with your listening audience, because I'm sure they'll be interested in this. And I have to say this, by the way. The first time I ran the prayer, I was really interested in the Rh negative factor. Why? Because people think, or there's a postulation out there, that blue bloods have the Rh negative factor, and that's the reptilian like thing. So I put a link, and I actually did a survey on my Facebook wall. So we posted this prayer, right? Freedom from reptilian genetics, which had gotten all these people delivered. And I said, do this prayer if you have Rh negative blood. And if you have Rh positive blood, try it and see what happens. And what I found was that people with Rh positive blood were getting delivered just as frequently as people with Rh negative blood, with physical manifestations, ab reactions, and the whole bit. And they told me about it. So if you were to ask me, Daniel, what is the meaning of Rh negative blood? Like, I don't know, because I thought it was that until I ran the test.
That's good. That's good, because there's a lot of hypothesizing on what
I know that
has some sort of this or that. So that's good. Glad my wife's not a reptile.
So here's the thing. I ran into this concept that there are different kinds of reptilians, and when it comes to the way that they manifest, you seem to have 3 basic categories. One is dormancy, which I would say is the majority of what like someone doing deliverance ministry would run into, where for the most part, the reptilian nature is dormant in the person. It's sitting there as code, as markers in the bloodline, as pieces of DNA. It's opening that person up for attacks, but they're not sitting in a black robe at rituals, shape-shifting and so forth. Then there are the more active shape-shifting reptiles, which literally you could also call them skinwalkers. These would be the kinds of individuals that people, it seems to be that it is the reptilian consciousness that drives the person, whether they're physically looking like a human or they are shape-shifting into that reptilian form. And then you have the Draco reptilians, which they seem to pretty much stick to craft, underground military bases, and other locations. They're never taking a human form. They seem to always be in their reptile body. And that's basically the different categories I've run into over the years. And so I just kind of frame it like that. And if there's a better way to explain it, I'm sure someone somewhere that's been more of an insider than I am will be able to do that. But that's my observational perspective on the thing. With that said, the shapeshifter category seems to be a situation where there's a takeover in the womb. That's the information that I've gotten, where that reptilian nature actually hijacks the body, like robbing a nest. It kind of hides the human spirit or suffocates it and uses that spirit as the life force that the reptilian entity in the body will then feed off of. And then it will become the dominant consciousness, so to speak, driving that person. So, with the Drake,
Dan, is it like the way we talk about the demonic, in the sense that like it needs a body? In that sense, if it's not Draco, it's the reptilian thing, they need like a host?
Yeah, well,
or does it exist as a creature, sort of a standalone creature?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because with the demonic stuff, Okay. You will have different levels. Like you have for on one side, you have walk-ins. Like I would call them walk-ins, where you have people that do trance mediums that have a specific entity that they channel. And what that entity does is it will step into their body, change their voice, push their soul to the side or out of the body completely for a period of time. And it'll even carry the powers that it has in the spirit world and manifest them through the physical body. And that person will be that entity for a period of time. And then the entity will step out of the body, and then the person will be back at the surface. And you would call that kind of like a walk-in. There may be some shifting of like bone structure. The jaw may change a little bit. The voice will change. Sometimes the eyes will change in this kind of situation. But usually the walk-ins will be around, but they don't always live in the body. Usually the ones that live in the body are more the goons, that is the lower ranking demonic entities that are, I'm going to use a lot of higher level terms here, but composited to human soul fragments, have been given posts and jobs within an inner world, the heart realm of the individual because of different sin bondages or generational iniquity. They're taking orders. And then you will have the higher ranking principalities like Zeus or Poseidon, or certainly Satan and these guys. Most of them do not live in the physical bodies of the humans at all, because they're doing a lot of things. They are territorial. They are big. They have a lot of business that they conduct. They have their own bodies, frankly. And so they are attached, like quantumly, to the people that are under their jurisdiction or in bondage to them, but only under certain occasions will they manifest to the front of a person's body, usually when they're going to do something big with that person, or if that person is involved in some kind of like massive deliverance with someone like me, and that entity wants to show up and try to, assert itself, which is always funny to watch. So the reptilian thing, it's more than that, because it is genetic. It's actually sharing the nature of the genetic code of the body, and its consciousness is basically in some cases becoming the governing consciousness in the body, like through the person's life. In the shapeshifter's case, it's a little different.
It's like yes and kind of, because it's like we talk about underground military bases. They're like lizard things that are walking around that don't look like people. Is there also a variant where there's like things walking around look like people, but they have this reptilian thing to them? So
that's exactly what I'm saying. It's both.
Okay.
And when you get into the world of reptilians, that's what part of the reason why it gets so confusing, because I was confused for a long time, because I was like, is there a difference between these Draco reptilians that people report walking around that are literally 7 feet, or in some cases up to 20 feet tall?
Could we talk about maybe their origin, where they're from, and maybe then you can delineate the differences?
We could talk about some of that. So it seems, and this is what I've been told, is that the at least the Draco reptilians associate with a number of different star systems, which includes Alpha Draconis, Sirius B, Orion, and Zeta Reticuli.
Reticuli.
I knew a few of those words.
Oh, right. It's like, well, that's not helpful, because that's just space stuff, right? So when you ask about their origin, like where do reptilians come from like a biblical narrative?
Yeah.
That is a really good question, because I've listened to people that said, well, the Nakash in the garden was a serpent, and that was a reptile. So maybe reptilians are just biblical Nakash or something like that. And so here's the thing, when I was trying to solve the problem of getting people delivered, and by the way, anybody can go to bridemovement.com, listen to this, and you think you have a problem with reptilians, or you're manifesting, because I'm talking about it. And you can get the Freedom from Reptilian Genetics prayer, pray it. It's also in my first book under Freedom from Non-Human Bloodlines and Genetics. And when you get delivered, you'll be asking, why did this work? But that's the proof in the pudding. It's like, is the knowledge actually setting people free, which it is. But the Nakash, I actually raised this question several times. So let me give you context here. Let's say I'm working with a person, okay, and we're doing deliverance and what I would call deprogramming. Now, when I begin to get into the work, I'm not just doing it with the person's presenting consciousness and I'm just sitting there talking to them and we learn everything about everything. What happens is I have to meet their alternate personalities one by one and destroy the demonic bondages that reinforce amnesia walls. And in that process, I'm also getting into what are called inner worlds. Now, inner worlds exist because we have a subconscious, and the subconscious is most easily understood as the biblical heart. So when the Bible says heart, if you do a study on it and you marry that to subconscious, what you realize is the Bible explains our subconscious to a T. Let me just give you a little example. The Bible says as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Okay. What does that mean? That means that if I think that I am lovable, that means that if I think that I am successful, that means that if I think I am high achieving, then if that's what I'm running in my subconscious, I'm probably going to demonstrate a life that follows suit with what I'm believing. And I'm also going to generate a field around me. It's literally an electromagnetic field that comes out of the heart. It extends from the body at least 6 to 8 feet. You hit a person's electromagnetic field from that organ way before you come in contact with their physical body. Like that will actually pull certain activity towards us or repel certain activity towards us. If there's a lineup of 5 people and one of them has a lot of positivity sitting in their heart, and you can only, choose one person to give a great opportunity to, you will most likely be magnetized to the person that has it in their heart that they're going to be the one to receive it, not as a conscious mental assent, but as a subconscious conviction. This is who I am. So that's why the Bible says the man thinks in his heart, so is she, which is why God is after the heart. God's after the heart. Satan's after the heart of man. Heart of man is the number one real estate and battleground of the spirit world. And the entire parable of the sower is about the heart. And then the Bible says this funny thing. It says, the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And the question is, like, why would God want something that's deceitful above all things and desperately wicked? Well, because he wants to reprogram it, because this life is tough. It's heartbreaking. We go through a lot of really dark things, and it causes our heart to get all kinds of bad programming. Like, we're no good. We'll never be good enough. God doesn't like us. We're losers, on and on and on, right? And so when you carry that in your heart and you make decisions based on what's in your subconscious, suddenly you can easily see how a person's whole life can be decided by their hurt, which is the exact case that many people are in right now. Their whole life is on a counterfeit timeline because they're hurting. They've never healed from it. Their heart's broken. And that's where they're making their decisions from. Now, why do I say all of that? Because the heart is real estate. It's a territory. And when you get into deprogramming work, you realize that the subconscious is the location where all of the alternate personalities live. And they live in inner worlds, which include cities, dungeons, castles, hospitals, laboratories, and all kinds of other stuff. So in this landscape of the subconscious, the spirit world merges with the internal world. And so once you're in the subconscious, it is very, very reasonable to have encounters with alternate personalities, sure, also demons, also weird stuff like synthetic entities and composite entities, Jesus Christ, and angels. Everything will be able to populate that subconscious heart realm. And you know that because the Bible says that Jesus wants to be in it. He says he stands at the door and knocks. Whoever opens unto him, he will come in and sup with him. Like he literally is targeting the heart. Holy Spirit writes upon the fleshy tables of our heart. He sheds the love of God abroad in our hearts. So God's got to be in there, but then all kinds of other stuff will be in there. This is also the same territory where these weird entities set up their thrones and their stuff. So you'll find a person, and let me give you this example. They love to worship God and read their Bible, but every weekend they're getting smashed with their friends at the bar, right? absolutely wasted. And then they go back and they're like on church on Sunday, worshiping God, because Jesus has Sunday morning and worship area of their heart. But, Friday night at the bar, because those are my friends, that Jesus doesn't have that part of the heart. That belongs to something else. And so when we get into that heart realm, this is where we get a lot of answers, because, I will be able to encounter with my clients, Jesus and angels, and they'll hear them talking like you hear me talking. Once we're on that realm, once we're plugged in, like they will hear them talking like you hear me talking, or the demons and the parts. And so once we get to this place in the work, we're able to actively problem solve. And this is, I said all of that to say this. I've been in situations, in sessions where it's like, all right, look, God, Jesus, who is standing right there while my client hears him talking to them, does this person have a problem with reptilian genetics? Yes or no? And he'll be like, yeah, they do. And I've just asked the question. I'm like, Jesus, is the reptilian stuff the same as the Nakash in Genesis? I actually asked the question to multiple people, also in my own prayer time, just, whatever. And the answer always comes back the same. No. Two different classes. Satan sits in a completely different class of entity than these reptiles that are flying around in craft. They're much lower ranking when you talk about the hierarchies of the spirit world. And never once in any of the research, which is just literally asking questions that I've done, has a different answer been presented. So we're still stuck with the question, what is the origin of these entities? And the answer is, I don't completely know. Could God have created them in that form? And could they have gone into their own rebellion way, way long ago? Quite possibly, because guess what God did create? He certainly created the dragons, and he certainly created the seraphim, which are like the burning ones. And the interesting thing, because you all brought that up, if you look at the 72 princes of hell, and you read that in the Lesser Key of Solomon, which I did, it turns out that Leviathan is classified as a fallen seraphim. And what is he? A giant dragon. So, there we can start making connections. So, like, at the end of the day, these guys flying around in craft, I don't know, but certainly they are using human hosts to advance some of their agendas, because we are seeing that they are intentionally going after people and putting their DNA in them. And that's the problem that I'm running into in many cases. Putting their DNA in them. Putting their DNA in them.
Dan, is this coordinated within the realm of darkness? Is it like this subgroup has this specific thing they're doing that's part of a bigger plan, or are they kind of operating independently, sort of all with the idea they're at enmity with God?
Yeah, I know, right? So
I mean, that's a big question.
It's a big question.
Yeah.
All right. It is a bigger plan. There are so many stories I could share here. So here's one of the things that I ran into. Okay, so I was working with one of my clients, and they had been targeted for the reptilian agenda for transitioning humanity, for lack of better terms. So they were a target of that. And let's just say this. In doing the work, we wound up going into their inner world and through a portal that is a gate that was built into their inner world that took them to another realm. And that other realm was a library realm. And that library realm belonged to the reptilian group. And they had a lot of volumes in there about specifically their agendas for transitioning humanity according to their own objectives. There are actually a lot of books about that subject. It is a spiritual library. So is it a big agenda? Is it intentional? Is it mapped? Well, the answer is, yeah, it is. And, but see, in order to really talk about some of these things, you're taking this conversation into a realm that's very hard for people to track with, because I'm now talking on levels, dimensions, different planes of existence. And you have to accept all of this as reality before you can really understand the size and scope of the agenda the reptilians have against humanity.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to think about it like the Men in Black movie. You're introduced to it. It takes you probably 6 months to accept it, while your partner, who's been involved in this for a long time, he's just laughing at you like, yeah, all these entities exist. This is the world that you don't realize is right in front of your face. But I think 2.5 years into this podcast, we're green in some ways, but in other ways we've heard a lot of this weird stuff. So I think a lot of listeners, that is the hardest part for them, is just accepting that none of this works like they think it does, and all the memes, jokes, and all the tabloids and stuff. There's probably more truth in some of these things than anything you're going to read on the news. And I don't know why, but I think if you hear these stories over and over again, you begin to realize that it is more complicated, but it's got that Men in Black feel, I think.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, so I was going to tell you a little bit about the Dracos. Now here's what I was told about the Dracos. The Dracos, which would be the ones that don't really shapeshift much. They have different classes. They actually have like a worker class, a warrior class, and a ruling class. And one of the things that, if you want to talk about reptilians, like they are a species unto themselves. Like, and that if you are able to engage with a reptilian intelligence, which inadvertently I have, because they've talked to me as I'm dealing with my client issues, you realize several things. Number one, they're very proud of the fact that they are their own species. Very proud of it. Number two, they hate humans. Like, they think we are disgusting. But it's kind of like a love-hate relationship, because for whatever reason, they seem to need humans. Reptilian entities are typically extremely selfish by nature. And I'm going to tell you, they have this unique characteristic, and your whole listening audience is going to go nuts when I say this, because it sounds so off. Now I'm going to tell you a story. They smell like cat pee. That's what reptilians smell. They smell like cat pee. And the funny thing is, I have a friend, and I told her, reptilians smell like cat pee. And this person, of course, they didn't believe in reptilian stuff. I mean, they were just like, so to have such a like overtly specific statement told to them by my smiling, goofy face, they were just like, this is off. This is where I draw the line. Dan Duval, I'm drawing the line. I like your kingdom stuff, but this, psh.
No cat pee. No cat pee.
So they had a friend who had a daughter, and she was doing some intervention ministry with this girl. And somehow she ended up getting out my prayer for freedom from reptilian genetics for this girl or whatever. And I don't remember all the specific details of the story, but essentially I believe they got started in like maybe 1 or 2 lines. And the girl was like, I need to go right now. I need to run to the bathroom. Because as soon as they got engaged with the deliverance prayer, and the reptilian entity that was, in her genetics and anchored to the body began to come up and respond to what was processing, she smelled the cat pee smell and thought she had peed on herself, but she didn't. It was the entity.
Wow.
And when my friend got that report, she was like, oh my gosh, this guy is not nuts like I thought he was. It's a fact. They smell like cat pee. And so this is another thing that I'm going to say, and people are, I think, really going to identify with this. When a person carries reptilian genetic code as an iniquity in themselves, it will get activated under certain circumstances. And what will happen is if a person is under the influence of alcohol, and they have that reptilian thing going on inside of them, that they are going to be predisposed to extreme acts of violence and aggressive behavior. And their eyes will change. And that's one of the first things that people notice. It's that person has that stuff sitting in, it might be dormant, but man, when you put some alcohol in there. And another thing that will also bring that dormant reptilian thing to the surface, bondage and sadomasochism. Like BDSM sex, if a person has that reptilian nature sitting on the inside of them, and you bring out like whips and pain and that kind of stuff, eyes will change, the reptilian nature will begin to take over. There'd be a bit of bloodlust. These kinds of things will actually aggravate and activate that natural disposition because of what's sitting in their genetic code. And people that have been in relationships with folks that have this in them have horror stories. They have horror stories about the monster that individual turns into when they're on alcohol. And, and of course, they won't tell you always the other stuff, but someone like me, I get the whole picture. I get the whole story. And I've actually talked to women that have been married to these reptilian natured handler husbands that, gosh, it's a horror story what happens in the bedroom, and then it's always usually paired with the physical abuse as well. But that's something that just seems to be a trend. Like you can map it. It's typical, so to speak. So look, before we got started, I was told years and years ago that there is a reptilian reproduction process that seems to be pretty specific to the shape-shifting reptilians. Like literally how they put this in people and transfer it. And I can share that with your listening audience if you're interested. We'll run through it or not. We can also skip that and go somewhere else. It's up to you guys.
Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, all of it is just, I don't know. It's hard to know where to go at all because there's just so much here. I mean, just real quick. I think just for the listeners' sake, this is good to talk about this because I think it's hard for Christians to think that these things are from somewhere else, right? Because we just think it's just the world and human beings, and we're sort of the center of our spiritual universe, right? And so it's difficult for Christians to consider something like a reptilian or other species of things. But I mean, years ago when I got into Bigfoot, you'd hear stories and they said they come and go on UFOs. Where are they going? They're not staying here. They're going somewhere else. Where are these things coming from and why are they, and you think, and at that time as a Christian, I was like, this is blowing my paradigm because all I know is Jesus and humans. That's all I know. That's all I have the capability to think about. And so people listening to this podcast are freaking out because that's probably where they are too. And I was there a few years ago. I couldn't hear those stories and be like, how is it possible things are coming from other places to here, to our earth? That seems to be something I'm thinking about, and I'm wondering if listeners are thinking about that too, because that's probably the hardest part of this conversation.
Well, did I explain Genesis 1 and the cosmic nature of the human conflict in part 1?
It's hard to say because we've gone over that with so many guests.
I'd like to hear it though, honestly, because I can't remember either if we did.
Yeah,
I want to say we didn't. Someone could fact check me after the fact and tell me I'm a dummy.
I don't think we went into it in detail.
All right.
No.
So this is how God helped me to sort through this mess. Number one, in Genesis chapter 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And that phrase, Bereshit bara Elohim Shemaim Aleph Tav Eretz. And there's actually two Aleph Tavs between created and heavens, and then heavens and earth.
Mm-hmm.
Aleph Tav. And the Aleph Tav is one of those things in Hebrew. It's not really translated into an English word. So it just kind of sits there, and you can have prefixes and suffixes on the Aleph Tav, and found all throughout the Old Testament in the Hebrew. And so when you understand that Jesus defines himself as the Alpha and the Omega in the book of Revelation, and you realize that Aleph Tav is basically the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, then you realize that Jesus is putting his signature all over the Old Testament. Like, he keeps showing up. He is everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And so in Genesis 1:1, you see, in the beginning, God, Elohim, created Aleph Tav through Jesus, the heavens, Shemaim, and through Jesus, Aleph Tav, the earth. So the Bible says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. All things were created by him and for him. Without him, nothing was made that was made. It's like, I get it. So it's in Genesis 1:1. And the New Testament basically expands, it just says it straightforwardly. So we get it. Jesus is the creator of the universe. God created everything through him, through the Word. Wow. So we get that revelation, but here's what happens in Genesis 1:1. There actually is this extra letter on the second Aleph Tav. So it says, in the beginning, God created through Jesus the heavens. And then that second Aleph Tav has a Vav on it. And I remember the first time I was going through this and I was like, what the heck? Because I'm looking at, it's like Vav Aleph Tav. I'm like, is that another word? And it's like, no. But Vav, the Hebrew letter Vav, means nail. And for anybody that understands the Hebrew language is a massive algorithm where every letter has a numerical value and it also has a meaning. And every word in Hebrew is the composite structure of the individual letters. It's not arbitrary. Like, English words are so arbitrary. You could just put any string of letters, vowels, and consonants together, but then you ascribe it a meaning. In Hebrew, it's different. The meaning is derived from the letters individually. And so everything about that language is this massive algorithm that just unpacks infinitely. And part of the reason why is because these letters are actually components of who Jesus is. Because he, as the Aleph Tav, is the entire Aleph Bet alphabet, right? So, and we could talk about living letters because there's a lot that deals with frequency and all kinds of stuff, which really gets cool. But in this statement, what you see is that Jesus is nailing the heavens to the earth. Vav Aleph Tav. So in the beginning, God through Jesus created the heavens, and through Jesus nailed the heavens to the earth. Wow. Why is that important? Because then after God nails the heavens to the earth, he creates man from the dust of the earth. So the destiny of the heavens gets anchored to the earth in the first verse of the first chapter. Later on in the second chapter, we learn that the destiny of the earth gets anchored to man. So now man is in charge of the destiny of the earth, and therefore is also in charge of the destiny of the heavens as the image of God, which kind of creates a little bit of a conflict if you are not man, because now you are probably jealous. And then when man fails to do what he was supposed to do, which is fill the earth and subdue it. And that's a whole other concept, because why would you have to subdue something that was already perfect? Like, God put Adam in the garden and said, you're going to expand the garden, you're going to fill the earth and subdue it, because there was something to be subdued even at that time. The serpent was already in the garden. And then we talked about that in my last podcast, because I explained to you, God threw Lucifer out of heaven before Adam was put in the garden, which is why he was there in the garden to meet them. Already fallen, evil, diabolical, and ready to lead them into their deception. So because the destiny of the earth is tied to man, Satan made an intervention on that. And he caused man to fail. Now everything is in this cosmic mess. So who cleans it up? Creator and maker of heaven and earth himself, Jesus Christ, comes to redeem mankind by the sacrifice of his own flesh. So what he does is he nails the destiny of man to the cross in his own body, dying for our sins. So through Jesus, man is redeemed. And the plan is so that through man, earth is redeemed, so that through God's plan for the earth, the heavens are redeemed. And so you see themes like Isaiah 65 and 66, Revelation, new heavens and new earth. It's on God's agenda. Well, there are a lot of parties that would rather not see Jehovah's plan work out. And that would include some of these other entity groups that are not of human origin. And whatever their origin is, it's not human, and it's also not in league with our God. And so they're opposing God's plan through man, because that's the key to unlocking the redemption of the heavens and the earth. Therefore, they are hijacking, they're subverting us on a genetic level as part of their assault on God's plan. And with this, you actually end up with a much better framework for understanding the alien issue, the entity issue, all the other stuff that really, if you don't have a more cosmic view of what the plan of God really is, there's no room for it. It's like, I don't have anywhere to put this. Why are these things that, these Pleiadians, and I have a lot to say about those guys as well, and these Martians, and these, like, why are they coming after me and my children? Well, with this expanded view, it actually makes a whole lot more sense.
Yeah, human beings are given the birthright. We're given something that they want, and they hate us because of it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's just because so much of this stuff is off Earth. It's, for some reason, it's hard for people's paradigms. So you believe, just to get back on track here, it almost sounds like something I can compare it to. There are parasites and they're like viruses. Viruses try to, kill the host, and then parasites almost try to work with the host. So they have this symbiotic relationship, right? So they're entities that are trying to like infiltrate the body, work with the body. The body doesn't even know it's there, because obviously if you figure out you've got a parasite, you're going to try to kill it. You're going to try to get rid of it. Its whole goal is to coexist inside of you, and you don't even know. But then there are actual entities, the Dracos, that are coming to and from on craft. They're underground, working with our governments, and probably trying to build some army for Armageddon.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're nailing it, man. I mean, that is what I'm saying. And of course, your listening audience will get to make up their own mind, But here's the thing. Here's the thing. At the end of the day, y'all asked me. And so
we did.
I love it. Indeed. I love it. But you talk to people who deal with it, and not only they have it in them, but they're interacting. And I think you're the best person to talk to about these things, because one experience is different than talking to, hundreds of people with the same. You can kind of piece together a better understanding of these creatures when you interact with a lot of people who've had experiences versus just having one experience for yourself. That's kind of how I see it.
Yeah. Here's another thing that really gets tough, right? Because these reptilians, they are mean. I mean, they're nasty. And when people encounter them, because say they're part of government projects, or they're in these deep underground military bases, and the Dracos are literally down there walking around with their lab coats on, it's terrifying. I mean, and you don't know if they're going to eat you, hurt you, experiment on you. I mean, they'll do an experiment on someone about as fast as they'll eat them. They are very awful, and so, I mean, even in
we've heard that on our show, all those things. People have said they've seen it or heard it, and it sounds terrible. It sounds terrifying.
And that's another side of this thing that is an inconvenient truth. People that deal with these entities and all of a sudden, like the kind of torture and trauma that they go through is well hidden because of the technologies available. Like they can literally, I'll tell you another story. One of my clients was literally burned alive to a crisp in one of these situations. And they just pulled in some alien technology and literally regenerated the body. And in doing so, they would pull the soul right back into the body, and all the trauma is still there, but wake up in your bed the next morning. So
just throw this out there. We talked about this a couple episodes ago. This is why they cut the head off the giants, because they could do that. Apparently, they had the ability to heal themselves.
Sounds like Wolverine, man. Like the X-Men thing, where you just started healing up, right?
David cutting the head off of Goliath it wasn't an accident. He was doing something specific. They knew how to take care of these things. So, anyway, just throw that out there. We've heard sort of rumblings of these ideas that some of these entities have this ability, apparently.
Yeah, so they do that.
It's so wild, Dan. It's just like sometimes I love it. It is.
It just gets weirder on this show.
I think we just live. we as humans, maybe, and I say this, in a general broad brush, but we just like to feel like we have a safe little fence around our lives and our understanding of our faith and our existence. And these, as you call them, like inconvenient truths, or it push you outside of that. But I think the reality is in all this is that we serve the uncreated, I am who I am God, who doesn't fit in that box either, and is the King of Kings. He's the tip top, right? And I think we can talk about the crazy stuff that happens in the darkness, and the flip side of that is that our God is bigger and stronger, and I just think that sometimes it's like, gosh, we get to travel and listen to these crazy fascinating stories and things that it's like you step through the wardrobe in a Narnia kind of, and I'm sure that's how you feel sometimes, because you're hearing this straight from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better term, like a better analogy. But you get to, it's wild. I don't know. It's.
Don't tell us there's shape-shifting horse creatures.
Shape-shifting what?
Horse creatures.
Yeah, I thought you said something else.
He could have heard it from a shape-shifting horse, Luke. That's what I'm saying.
Dude, a centaur. Yeah, we never know, man.
That's funny. Yeah, look, I mean, you want to know the honest truth?
Oh, yeah.
Here's the honest truth. I am so out of touch with where I think 90% of people, like, I live in like a little bubble of like my own world where I'm helping the people that are aware of how I'm helping people. And
yeah, that's why I said Men in Black, because it's kind of like it's you're sort of in this like little office of people who understand that there's weird stuff goes on and you don't know how to interact with the general population.
Well, that's why I need your help.
We're
getting there, Daniel. People think we're weird now.
Well, Nate, it makes you think about like when we had John Dover on. And, we had he was a 30-year ranger on the Navajo reservation, and how this crazy experiences. And he was talking about the person that came right before he got hired, did it for one day, turned in their badge, turned in their vehicle, and was like, this is too much, I'm out.
Yeah.
And then he spends, and this is just a parallel to, we draw these two episodes together as well. Like Dan, I mean, you're like that 30-year ranger, and people that have shown up for one day, it's the life you live. It's just a...
Yeah, if you're still listening to this podcast at this point, congratulations. Because a lot of people have already turned it off. They just can't do it. They can't handle it. They're like that ranger. They just give the keys back. I can't even listen to this episode. It's too bizarre. It's too wild. It's too out there.
Well, look, here's the good news, though. The good news is that, it's not just information to be sad about. Like, we took all this data, weaponized it, and turned it on the devil's head. Mm-hmm. I mean, anybody, like I said earlier, like anybody can go on my website now and get Freedom from Reptilian Genetics, like the prayer. And not only that, but we've also been able to go after like reptilian councils, because they have, like I said, they are their own species, and they're their own governing bodies. And so we have even more advanced prayer resources to like take on reptilian councils, and a prayer resource called Freedom from Evil Councils and Alien Genetics. And this is my third book, Advanced Prayers that Shake Heaven and Earth, this guy. And I mean, I'll tell you, like, the kind of breakthrough that people have gotten on this stuff is just extraordinary. And I'm talking about like physical healing, while also getting peace of mind, attack stopping, abduction experiences completely getting shut down. Like, it's really huge progress on their personal problems. And here's the thing. You guys will probably be surprised at how many people are actually interested in this information of what I'm saying. Who would have thought the first podcast we did together went anywhere? But I'm always surprised.
No, but we know it did. So people are interested, right? Like that's the thing. It's like there isn't, just like talk about the analytics and the.
If it's their first time listening, is what I'm saying. If it's their first if this is like episode 1,
it's like you jump in the deep end with a weight belt on.
They pull their car over and they're just staring out the window. What in the heck are they talking about?
So we started this initial conversation about bloodlines and talking about the 13 bloodlines in the Illuminati. Is reptilians in one of, is that one of the, or is that completely separate? As I'm trying to piece things together.
So interestingly enough, reptilians didn't make the list of the 13. they fall into a category I would call races that are in league with the 13. I mean, all of that data, I'm pulling this from the deepest realms of systems. Like, what do I mean by systems? I mean, like the programmed worlds and the dimensions that are connected through them in the individuals that I'm deprogramming. So it's not like I can tell you guys, hey, go to this book and you'll find, the 13 root races, right? I mean, and for that reason, like this, what I mentioned to you before we got started on the podcast, like I have just created this new big, massive prayer template. I would call it like the Rolls Royce of my prayer resources. It's just like the folks that I have taken through this have just had the most off the charts encounter and breakthrough, deliverance, and everything. I mean, it is hectic. And yeah, we got the names of 13 races, and the whole idea behind that is there are 13 understood that there are 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati. And when people ask, like, what is the Illuminati? And I think I got into this a little bit on our first podcast as well. Well, they're bloodlines. Someone, when they say, well, I was recruited to the Illuminati, that's almost like a misnomer. It's like, well, maybe they saw that you had the bloodlines and they invited you into their influencer group, but you're either carrying the bloodlines or you're not. Like that's it. You're not going to not have the bloodlines and then be Illuminati. That's just deception. So like they're bloodlines. And I, for the longest time, was trying to figure out, like, well, if the Illuminati are 13 root bloodlines, why can't I find Rockefeller, Rothschild, and DuPont in like 3000 BC? There's like no reference to these surnames. And then I looked up all the surnames I could find and realized there's way more than 13 Illuminati surnames, like Cavendish. And I mean, I have a list of like 20 something in my first book, Prayers That Shake Heaven and Earth, for the prayer resource we wrote called Freedom from Illuminati, Bloodlines and Genetics, which was getting people set free to a certain degree. I was like, where's 13? How does this make any sense? And as we went through the years, what I was able to track more and more is it's not about the surname. It's about what's actually in the blood, which is the markers. It doesn't just stop at blood. It extends to DNA, RNA, and essence. And essence is a big one. And I'll just say this. If people don't understand essence, they're never going to get to the bottom of the problem of what the devil is doing, period. I mean, essence is like everything. Why? Because essence is life. Essence is life. So I was working with a client of mine. I'm going to give an abridged version of this, and we found that they were connected to this. It was like an alien queen containing her essence, thousands of years old. And I was like, how are you thousands of years old when this person was born literally like 50 years ago? But you as an entity are thousands of years old. And I'm telling you guys, because I got to talk to it, right? So we're having a conversation and it's giving me history and stuff from like 3500 BC. And behind that, I'm like, what the heck? I mean, things you couldn't look up and could have never known. I mean, she was telling me stuff about Mizraim, which is the father of Egypt.
Dude.
I mean, I'm telling you, like,
wow, what
in the world? And so as we got into it and we were doing the work, what we realized is that the essence of my client was hijacked, not when she was born, not even when she was on her way into the conception event, but literally thousands of years ago, because of the whole matter of we existed as life in Christ long before we were given an assignment in the earth. We were all created in Christ for a reason and a purpose. God said to Jeremiah, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And that knowledge of God that he has with us is not just like the day before. It's far in the indeterminable past outside of earth time. And we all begin as life, and from life derives spirit, soul, and body. And so essence sits at the center, and essence can actually get hijacked in a pre-Adamic context, which is part of the huge breakthroughs that we've had. Because once we figured that out, it was like, oh, now we get it. That'll make a lot of sense to some of your listeners. Other listeners, it won't make any sense to. It just depends on where people are at. So when we're talking about the Illuminati stuff, they have markers in the blood, but they also have their stuff sitting in the RNA and the DNA, and they're even implicating their agendas into a person's essence. And so I was trying to figure out, like, where are these surnames and how does this make sense? And then I realized, no, these aren't just surnames. These aren't just like families that decided to become bad apples. They're pulling on a pre-Adamic iniquity that comes from non-human source points. And that's when we realize there is a league, literally, of 13 root races that intervened on human populations that become the 13 root bloodlines of the Illuminati. All of these races are extremely hidden and unknown. And when we began to discover the names and identities of those races, that led to a quite a shift. In fact, it was so fun because, I do this thing now because I have coaches that I've trained, right? And so every Monday I'll do office hours, and I'll have my coaches bring in like the toughest person they're working with, like really tough. And I'll demonstrate how I minister to people so everyone gets to learn, like, this is how you can get past the seemingly impossible stuff. And so I'm sitting with someone, and certainly there's some very, very difficult stuff, but we get past it, right? And we begin to make some real headway. Next thing I know, who manifests to the surface? Hello, I am a Pleiadian Grand Master. Why are you here? It's like, well, you're pretty high ranking in the kingdom of God, and I'm very high ranking in the kingdom of darkness, and I wanted to talk to you. And of course, this person is connected to the secret space program. I'm not going to give any other details than that. But the punchline is, I said, are you here because you guys know that I figured out the 13 root races of the Illuminati? And he was like, well, yes. Okay, so I just say all that to say this. Like, I think we're right. And no, reptilians don't rank on that list. But the Pleiadians do. They seem to be one of the 13.
So do these bloodlines go back to their own Genesis 6 event? Is there some sort of origin that is, carved out at a specific time in history?
Like the rebellion in heaven?
Well, I mean, this opens a big can of worms, doesn't it? Like,
sure does.
What
does, Dan.
the heck? So for anybody that wanted to believe that, humans are the only creation of God with intelligence beyond apes, you should have turned this podcast off a long time ago and found someone else to listen to, because
hey, pigs are pretty smart too. Pigs are smart. We got pigs, we got dolphins, and apes, right?
French bulldogs
and humans.
So then you run into this thing where you realize, like, people that are carrying these tainted bloodlines have a lot of relatives that are not human at all, which extends to more explanation as to why people are being targeted and visited so in such extraordinary ways and increasingly over time. Like, this isn't going away. There's only going to be more. There's only going to be more people connecting to these off-planet groups, these hollow earth groups. Okay. I told you Pleiadians, and I'm going to give you another bombshell. Elves happen to be one of them.
Elves?
Yes.
Do they sing?
Of course.
Do they make toys? Just kidding. I'm kidding.
Toys and cookies.
They live in a tree or a shoe.
We're talking about Keebler.
Baby.
Oh my goodness.
Elves.
Yeah.
You're dropping them one by one. We got Palladians, elves. Reptilians don't even make the list.
I can't give any more right now.
Can't.
Because I've already lost half your audience. I mean, I don't know.
He wants to come back from the trilogy.
We just got to break it down for 11 more. I don't know how many episodes it's going to take, but we'll get you back.
I know.
Now we're to 7. All right?
Exactly. The 11 deep dives with Daniel Duval.
I'm telling you guys, none of this is going away. One of the most problematic bloodlines a person's going to have is the Druidic bloodline, right? And everyone knows the Druids were a real group in Europe.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, just pure darkness and what we would call Satan worship. I mean, these guys, they're totally connected to the Elven Kingdom and the Fae Kingdom. I mean, totally.
So did all these groups enter into these bloodlines at different times, different events, sort of their own hijacking?
Well, it seems like there is a convergence of agenda on the Genesis 6 timeframe. That seems to be a really big deal, even though the records that we work with, and probably a lot of the people that you interview work with, deal a lot with, okay, what do we have in 1 Enoch, and what do we have in Genesis, and what do we have in, some of these other extra biblical books, and you basically run into this situation where you have 200 watchers who descend on Mount Hermon, and we say, okay, will these watchers become the progenitors of these giants in the earth, and these are hybrids, and there's clearly an infiltration of human lines with non-human genetics, and that's where we begin to see a lot of conspiracy get linked into, and then we have to figure out what to do with the flood. Did it really kill all the Nephilim, or did some of them survive? How did they get to the other side of the flood? And so forth. But that Genesis 6 event, from the text that we have, there's no guarantee that that's all that happened. It's just part of what happened, a major part of what happened. But it seems like that is a major convergence point for this agenda to infiltrate the human lines. And where all these other groups fit in, I don't know exactly, but we are continuing to get information along these lines. And at least on the Pleiadian side, it seems like they had some similar timing.
And Dan, do you think that Apostle Paul had knowledge of these groups of people, these entities when he's writing his books, talking about principalities and powers? Does he know about the Reptilians? Does he know about the Palladians? Does he know about these creatures? Think he knows?
There are these, look, I don't know, but there are these smoking guns. I mean, because he makes comments that are just like, why would you say that based on the framework of understanding of the Pharisees and Sadducees? And I mean, like he says something in the book of Ephesians, it is to the intent that the manifold wisdom of God might be made known by the church to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places. Like, where did he get the concept for that statement? And then you have Jesus saying this really, off-topic statement to the Pharisees. He's like, you are of your father, the devil.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I've met plenty of people that have Satan DNA in them because they were engineered to have it, and it is real and it is in there. I mean, I talked to people that went through rituals where they were married to Satan and literally had to have conception events with him physically, and he literally toasted their flesh in the process. I mean, it was like really awful stuff. Like the DNA of Satan fathers stuff with humans. But Jesus is sitting there talking to the Pharisees saying, you are of your father, the devil. We like to make metaphors and allegories out of a lot of these things. It's like, that seems pretty straightforward to me. There's a lot of smoking guns as you work your way through the Bible. That's like, well, I wonder. I wonder. But I don't know, maybe not.
Well, I mean, you wonder if some of these biblical writers had to have sort of tapped into a source that was not like the average person, I guess. And
here's the other thing, right? Like, how many times has history been rewritten for us here in the 21st century? And we have history that's sitting there in plain, like we can Google all kinds of history about all kinds of groups. seeing, I mean, and you just talk about it, right? Finding giants in South America. And I mean, look.
Here in America, the 1800s up until 1920.
Literally fly over Peru and you can see all the megalithic structures. They're like, who built those? Oh, I don't know. Nothing strange going on here. It's just, and L.A. Marzulli walking around showing everybody these like skulls with the elongated heads. And it's like, that is something that we don't talk about. But
LA
business as usual. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, we're surrounded by evidence of a totally different narrative. And then we're given a totally different narrative. And now you're crazy if you consider the alternative. And there's so much evidence of the other side. I mean,
that's our whole podcast.
Yeah, we might have to just rip that audio out there and just be like, here's part of our new intro. Thank you, Dan. Come listen to the podcast. Here we are.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, why would you guys be doing this if not for the fact that you took the red pill and woke up and said, what the heck am I doing believing this nonsense? Right. If we were really to do a book burn that changed the history of like the destiny of the world, I'd say burn every middle school history book.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, like what kind of disinformation campaign have we been overtaken by?
It's very concerted. Yes, it's intentional. I mean, it's you know that. We're talking
so many things on our world have been put there by technologies and groups that absolutely do not fit with the narrative of the development of mankind according to what we've been told. And there's so many things that they don't even talk, like we talk about all the time. Oh, these pyramids in Egypt. You know what has way more pyramids than Egypt? China.
Yeah.
Land of the dragon. There are pyramids all over the place. I mean, there are so many pyramids. They just grow gardens on top of them. A lot of them
you're giving Nate so much juice right now. He's been talking about the pyramids in China for the last month. This is it's not in our show, but just
I dig through old archives all the time, and I found one of a couple pilots saw them in the jungle. And then they were trying to, locate them. And it was a big conspiracy. And then they're like, there are no pyramids in China. It's funny because everything you're saying, you go through the newspaper archives, they find something, and then there's fake news people come out and they try to debunk all these things that there were no giant bones found in the Ohio Valley. You see articles like that in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. They're trying to they've been trying to rewrite history for hundreds of years. And I see it all the time, and it drives me crazy because I'm digging through these archives, trying to just find something interesting, make videos for the podcast. But yeah, there's pyramids all over the world. And we talked about on an episode last night about how they're all aligned to the constellations and the stars. And the ancients knew astrology. And Daniel was the head who knew more than everybody. And Christians are just snoozing at the wheel. We don't have any idea. Like the ancients are just 1,000 times smarter than we could ever be. And it must be crazy, Daniel, to sit back and listen to some of these ancient entities talk out of people and tell you stuff.
You learn a lot.
From
You've been around
the
for
way old days.
A couple thousand years. You probably know a lot of things. Don't want to play Jeopardy against that guy. Dan, I have we started this thing, talking, this has been about the reptilians. And so I'm curious your take on, these leagues of darkness. Dude.
I just want to know what they look like.
These other entities, they look like they're still they could be 10, 20 feet tall, look like lizards, smell like cat pee. I don't want to see that. I'll stay away from those things. No, but we talked about they are infiltrating places of power. In your mind or in your research here, in your opinion, Endgame for them, right? There's a lot of things at play here. We talked a lot about, with some previous guests, previous shows, Nate with Tim, about the idea that, God has given us dominion here, and the only way that we can lose it is to give it up, to not become, to lose our humanity. We also know that we bear the image of the living God. So these things inherently hate us because they're at enmity with God. We also know that the prophecies have been written that spell out their demise and their end and their judgment. And so there is an aspect of that in their agenda. But, you hear from, a lot from the source. Do you think it's all of that, like yes and, as far as what these, the reptilians for one, but also these other factions are doing? Is it to prevent try in the best way to prevent their own demise, and sort of prevent the prophecies from coming true by drawing the game out or removing humanity. Those are some things that we've been hypothesized here because of the way that, God has given this place. As Paul says, we'll judge angels here. It's the idea that this is our home and our place, and we're the regents of this space by the decree of the King of Kings. And you said jealousy at one point, and I see that. It's easy to see that. A lot of the angelic race, it's easy to see that was a problem, right? So
I mean, look, what you're saying, I would say, all of the above. Yes, and yes, plus like that. So I mean, they have a few very straightforward agendas, right? They want to destroy humanity. They want to find a way to beat God, because God's timeline and God's determination includes their judgment. So, it's kind of like a game of survival. They don't want that. And Jesus already resurrected. So now they're trying to find a way around the inevitable. And so, like in a simple sense, okay, destroy humanity, change humanity, graduate humanity through transhumanism, posthumanism, install an antichrist, build a beast system, mind control everybody, and cause God's plan for man to fail, right? Establish a new world order. Like all of those are part of the ultimate end game plan for them. On a higher level, they're holding the whole creation in bondage, right? And that becomes a higher level perspective where they've done their best to create a gridlock on not just humanity, but through humanity and humanity's bondage and things in the past, holding creation in bondage, time in bondage. And they've gone forth and created a whole lot of what I would call counterfeit timelines, which include the manifestation of their plans. And they're trying to bring the counterfeit timelines into manifestation. So they engineer timelines that are not of God. And then they try to bring them in. And those timelines, if they can get enough of those in regarding individual lives, cities, states, nations, all that stuff, then they can completely change the course of where everything's going and beat God, because they think ultimately, if they can cause God's word to fail and prove him to be a liar, then he'll have to abdicate his own throne, and voila, they win. So I mean, it is that, and then they lose,
right? Because
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Yeah, that's the good news. One thing, Dan, you said that I think is fascinating that you brought up, we hadn't talked about, I think is worth pointing out. The Adam was told to subdue the earth. And what you're talking about here is actually the inverse of that. It's the sons of Adam, the offspring of Adam, us being subdued by the outside, right? It's the opposite. And it's so simple, really, that's the agenda. But I don't think I'd really heard it in that terminology. And it makes a ton of sense. I mean, that's an easy, God says do this, and they're saying, no, we're going to do man's not going to subdue the earth, and the things that are out there, the things that are out there are going to subdue man. And you could almost sum up the history of mankind saying that's the way that things have been operated.
That's very insightful.
Yeah. I mean,
isn't it true though? Until now. I mean, and this is the thing that I'm very encouraged, guys, because okay, so you drag me into the, deep end. You give me this subject. Say, Daniel, we want you to talk about the worst subject ever and make sure, this podcast flunks. I'm cool. It's okay. But no,
it's good. It's going to be good.
I think more people will get a lot out of this than you think. But this is the thing. I'm very encouraged. Because what I realize is that I get to be part of a generation that figures it out. Like, wait a minute, we've been getting conned for a long time. But now, way at the end of the book, you have this company of people that wakes up and says, wait a minute. I'm not going to stand for this. I serve a bigger God than you do. Reptiles, Pleiadians, Illuminati, Satanists, all of you, human and non-human combined, all of you are serving inferior stuff.
Yes, sir. Amen.
And
come on,
my God with me is the majority. And this is the beautiful thing. God has sent a lot of people into this earth for such a time as this. This generation is very special because this is a generation that is sent to undo the iniquity in the bloodlines that has been put there over thousands and thousands of years in preparation of what they're trying to build right now and collapse their whole structure right when they're just about to pull it off. That's what's happening. That's what's happening. We're a big part of that because I'm writing like all of these prayers that's absolutely causing this to happen. And we are very excited to make these available for free to the world, and people can engage these on our website, bridemovement.com, or deliverance.bridemovement.com, which is our deliverance portal, or just get with our coaches and work through stuff, because this is what's happening. As people get free, and as they are allowing for the finished work of Jesus Christ to cleanse the bloodline iniquity they have been born into or engineered into and have carried, what that is doing is simultaneously rendering judgments against these entity groups, their councils, their grids, their realms, their craft, all of this stuff. And it's opening them up to massive hits by the armies of God, the angels, the kingdom, and they are being taxed big time when people get free on this level. It's like the devil's worst nightmare on steroids, like thousands and hundreds of thousands of believers waking up, getting set free of their bloodline iniquity and demanding a judgment and back pay, because when the thief is caught, he'll restore sevenfold even to the whole of his house. So all the stuff the devil's stolen, opportunity, generational wealth, success, hope, peace, joy, being taken back by force by like thousands and hundreds of thousands, and ultimately, I believe, millions in the same generation, is going to be really cool to watch. And it's happening in real time. Like, that's what we're part of. I don't know if y'all realize what God was setting you up for when you're doing this podcast, but you are part of an operation of heaven called the Great Awakening, because God is waking people up, because he can't heal folks and deliver folks of things they refuse to believe exist.
That's true.
You ever try to, get someone healed of tuberculosis when they don't believe it exists? It's like, wow, that's really awful. All those physical symptoms you manifest, and you're like, yeah, what? I don't have anything wrong with me. And it's like, yes, you do. You're deluded. You're in psychosis. Like, you're literally dying, but that's where people are spiritually. They're like spiritually dying, and they're completely out of touch. They can't believe what's happening to them. And God's like, I want to heal that. I want to deliver you of that.
Symptoms.
Deliverance is the children's bread. I'm a good God. That's what Jesus is saying. He's like, I'm a good God. I'm the one that wants the good things for you. And this is the generation that figures it out. So I'm very encouraged.
Yeah, Nate, I love that, Dan. When we tackle heavy things, and one of the things we like to do, and Dan, you just seamlessly did it, is to turn the page and talk about the hope, right? Because it's in our podcast, we talk about the weird stuff out there and the creatures, and we talk about the things that exist in the darkness to expose it and to empower people. But it's leaving people with a lasting hope and letting them. That is what it's all about, right? Is that we have victory over, and I love the way you put all that we are a generation that's waking up, and I think you can see that. If you have eyes to see that, I think a lot of people listen to this show do, that's happening. Nate, I think we always try to like set that up to be like, hey, let's talk about why we have hope or whatever when it comes to these sort of dark places you can go, right? And you just a mic drop. It was fantastic.
Yeah. So just to recap, the Reptilians are like the rebellious junior high kids. They're not even on the top. They're not even the top 10 list of things, and we gotta have you back to get into some of these other creatures out there. That's what I love. I love these conversations, and that's what we talk. We just talk about the creatures, and I think what you're saying, Daniel, is like we give people some really good bones to chew on that some of these creatures are out there, and because they hear these stories and people have seen these things, and they start to go, oh, I can start to trust my Bible more. I can start to trust all these stories more, because weird stuff's happening to people. And it's more than just anecdotal. It's real, and it's happening. Whether they see a UFO, or their grandma ran into Bigfoot, or some werewolf creature came out. And I mean, we get emailed the weirdest stuff all day long, but you'd be surprised at how many people have had some sort of encounter with a creature, and their faith is different than people who haven't had an encounter with a creature.
Well, it forces you into accepting these things that you'd rather not accept actually exist, and then how does your faith encompass that? It's a paradigm breaker. It's like a glass ceiling that people got to go through, and then realize that like my faith is big enough to encompass all of this, and in fact, it's so big that it's subdued.
I can crack open the Old Testament
and declares victory over this, and that's, man, how powerful is that?
Well, that's and I think that's the other side of this. You know, how big is Jesus to you? And that's the question that we all have to ask ourselves. How big is Jesus to me? Because that is one of the biggest reinforcements of the cognitive dissonance and the false reality overlay, as I call it, is the size of Jesus to us. That's all right. Well, my Jesus is big enough to die for my sins and make sure I get to heaven when I die. But that's about it. I don't think he's big enough to solve my financial problem or my marriage problem or my problem with my kids. He's not that big. He's just big enough to cover my sins. So next person goes, well, how big is your Jesus? Well, my Jesus is big enough to solve my financial crisis because this is my testimony. And in fact, I know he died for my sins, but I also know that he's big enough to solve like my children's existential crisis. And in fact, my Jesus is big enough to help me like launch a new business concept, but he is definitely not big enough to solve a problem if that problem stems from entities that do not originate on this planet. My Jesus isn't big enough for that. Well, okay, next person, how big is your Jesus? And everybody kind of picks their stopping point. Like, this is how big my Jesus is. Well, a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Like, you're only going to experience the power and ability of God to the degree that you're able to agree that he is able. That's the whole conversation on faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is a matter of the heart. And that's why the Bible says, you know, if you say to this mountain, be thou removed and cast into the sea, and do not doubt in our heart, but believe that what you say is true, and shall obey you. Like, it's all about what's in the heart. And so for the person that goes there and says, you know, my Jesus is big enough, no matter how big the cosmic problem is, that's where you're going to begin encountering the power of God, which is where I'm encountering the power of God. I am encountering the power of God on the cosmic level, setting people free from cosmic structures because they come from these Illuminati bloodlines and are like literally fractured and farmed out across the multiverse. And God is big enough for that problem. So, you know, that's the question I'm asking your audience. Like, where would you like to park your car?
Where'd you going to park a DeLorean at the end there, right at the very end?
We just kind of got this shoe shiner, you know, Sunday school version of Jesus when we were kids. And I think that on our show a lot, we've talked about everything from the temptation of Christ to the transfiguration to where he's going. You know, he's going to Pan. He's going to the temple of Pan, and he's saying, this is where I'm going to build my church. He's doing supernatural warfare all around. And because you can believe in some weird creature, you can start to see what he goes and does and what he's undoing. And just doing this podcast has grown my understanding of Christ tenfold. And I'm hoping it keeps growing more and more. And, you know, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, you know, is a true statement, because there are entities that try to have dominion around us and the earth. And Jesus is the king of all of them. And I think that for some reason you start at some weird blurry creature, you can work your way up to these complex, you know, like you're saying, these 12, basically like 12 different entities that run and try to infiltrate humanity. And if you start episode 1 of our podcast, you get here, you can actually kind of go, oh, okay, I get it. Or whatever happens with, you know, your grandma told you some story about some demonic deliverance that, you know, went on in her life or whatever. I think the thing about the podcast is it gives people permission, like, listen to the weird stuff and let it help you see your Bible more full, see this human story as one full story, as opposed to this fragmented little thing that often is taught to us in the church. These little just tidbits here and there, and there's no cohesive story of God trying to rescue humanity and give it back to his Father. And I just appreciate you coming on our show, and we'll have to hop into the elves and the Palladians. You tease so many things. It's oh man, we got these,
I can only give you 2, but we've got 13 bloodlines, and the elves.
And the elves are singing somewhere. So many weird creatures.
Dan, I want to.
Got a long list.
You've said it a few times, but I wanted to give you everybody who's hung on here to the end to. Because I know this has helped people already. We see it in our community. We've had messages about it. I want you just to again tell people where they can connect with you and your material and your ministry, because there are already stories in our community of people being delivered, and I mean that's a testament to the work you're doing into the calling that you've answered, and the Holy Spirit just doing what He does, because He likes to save his kids. So Jesus is in the business of redeeming his kids. But yeah, tell everybody again where they can find you and your ministry and your materials and your curriculum and the things that you've spent countless years and hours creating.
Thanks. Well, yeah. So bridemovement.com is the ministry hub, and that kind of takes you into everything. We have a lot of resources, a lot of free prayer resources on that website. We also have the link to our church, and we do have a local church here in Katy, Texas. We actually just bought a ministry campus, and we're going to be building a really nice facility. We have really cool plans, but we're not going to talk about those right now. But yeah, so we do have a local presence here in Katy, Texas. We have way more people that track with us online, though. We have, church all over the world. And we have a deliverance portal at deliverance.bridemovement.com, where I took a lot of the deliverance prayers I've put together over the years. I mapped it to a logic. And so you could take assessments, and it'll just ask you questions about stuff going on in your life, or ask you to look at a table, say, check the boxes of things that trigger you. And once you click send, it'll kick an email back into your inbox. And that email will tell you exactly what prayers to use for what issue. It's only in this day and hour can you do something like this cool. And you just go to the prayer resource page, and there I am on a video praying for you. And there's the whole template, so you can go through it yourself. And we've had thousands of testimonies of people getting delivered just with this free resource all over the world. We have another place, coach.bridemovement.com, because I train coaches to do what I do. And I like to think, I've gotten pretty good at this, and our coaches have demonstrated that God can use us as a team, and they are good, and they will help you. And you can either book sessions with them directly at coach.bridemovement.com if you have some pretty hectic problems, or you just want some help. And if you can't afford it, as a church, we sponsor you with 16 hours of free coaching. And all you have to do is go to the coach page and say, I would like to get a scholarship, and you'll just fill out a form and you'll get on the waiting list. And we also have another resource. It's called Overcomer Accelerated. We just launched it, and you can go to overcomeraccelerated.com. And this isn't actually run through Bride Ministries. My wife and I put this together ourselves, but it's a program that essentially works to train people receiving a healing journey, especially those that have been through satanic ritual abuse and government projects, like really tough cases. And one of the things that we've learned is people heal faster when they're in community, and people also heal faster when they have a level of understanding on how it works. And so I train DID coaches to do this work, but now we're training the people that are receiving it, and we're seeing immediately. I mean, we're already seeing the fruit of this program. We're running a pilot right now, and we do this in quarters. So the next quarter begins in January, and people can explore that opportunity on overcomeraccelerated.com. So I think that's enough.
It's great, man.
Yeah. Daniel, thank you so much, man. Thank you for coming on our podcast a couple times and helping us piece together some of the blurry creatures that are out there. And it sounds like there's a lot more episodes we got to do, Luke.
We're
not even close.
Merfolk and all that. And But I want to get. There's other things ahead of that in line, I think. But Dan, Dan, we're grateful for your time and for your ministry, and it's you spend a couple hours with us. We know that's we're grateful for your time. We know that's your time, and we're thankful you chose to spend it with us tonight. And yeah, man, we'd love to have you back, and whenever you'd like to come back. And
we'd love to send
we
you
got
a shirt
some swag
too,
out here. We can send you. We got.
Let us know.
Okay.
Yeah, just send us.
We'll email.
What's
that? I'll get you my address.
Perfect.
Oh yeah.
You can just
We'll
do
get you
that
a
right
shirt,
now.
man.
You can tell us your address, social security number. We'll get right to. No, we'll definitely.
This guy.
Yeah, we'll send some emails, get you some stuff, man. We appreciate it. So, thanks, man. Thanks again. This is always.
Yeah, thank you.
It's so cool. Like I was really looking forward to. I look forward to a lot of episodes, but like after the last one, I'm just glad.
We have some guests that always tease the next episode. You're one man.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We got to keep going.
We'll do it, friends.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.